Late in the year 2020 and months into a COVID pandemic shutdown, Putnam County authorized $45,000 of your tax money to hire a due diligence consultancy to look at the overtime and staffing at the Putnam County Sheriff's Office. Now, this was just a few months prior to the election for Putnam County Sheriff. While the timing of all of this sounds questionable, whose idea was this? Who was behind this report and why? And why was there such angry and volatile pushback against the conclusions of the report? Could it be that maybe, just maybe, some people expected the report's conclusions to be different than what they were? I've broken down this report into 6 modules, both the report and the stiff but unavailing pushback. At that point, you get to decide. And you know why? Because it's your $45,000, it's your tax money, which makes it your report, your Sheriff's Department, and your Putnam County government. This is Putnam County Crime Analysis, and I'm Andrew DeStefano. Let's go. How's everyone doing? Sometime late in the year 2020, $45,000 in Putnam County taxpayer money was spent on a due diligence consulting group, the Bonadio group, out of Manhattan. They were retained to look at the overtime spending and staffing at the Putnam County Sheriff's Office. Now, as everyone knows, election for Putnam County Sheriff was in the year November of 2021, and a negative report on the sheriff at that time no doubt would help any candidate that's running against him. So no doubt the timing of this report is propitious. Now, as a backstory, and according to the newspaper accounts that we remember at that time, there was constant, unrelenting criticism against the sheriff at that time regarding his overtime and his staffing. At some point, someone, or a group of people maybe, decided that it was a great idea to spend $45,000 of your tax money after a COVID pandemic shutdown to hire the Bonadio group to look at the operations of the incumbent sheriff just months prior to an election for Putnam County Sheriff. Now, to this day, and after 3 months of analysis, no coherent reason has been offered as to this report's necessity that I can find. And really, who authorized this thing and why? You're going to have to decide that one for yourself. Now, I've broken down this report into 6 modules, okay, as I said before. And I chose 6 because the Sheriff's Department and at points the County Executive's Office gave us 6 reasons as to why the report's findings are defective. Now, just some backstory on me. I've been studying this stuff at the postgraduate level for about 8 years now. All right, advanced crime analysis. This is the stuff that I study. People ask me all the time, what is it you're studying and why? This is what I study. Advanced crime analysis, means many things, and I take many varied courses. But generally, this is what I do: analyzing police data. All right. So the first general question that Bonadio grappled with was, what are the best staffing levels at the Putnam County Sheriff's Office, and how to arrive there? So just some commentary, all right? If you're going to criticize this report and somehow claim that this Bonadio report is defective, and then you learn when you read the report that that report is guided by and based on this white paper by a nationally renowned PhD professor, then you damn well better read this white paper, all right? Just a suggestion. Also, I like how Bonadio structured this report, and I have a lot of experience with this stuff in studying it. I like how they structured this report. Generally, there are 5 methods into staffing police departments. Bonadio took each of the 5 methods. They didn't have to. They didn't have to lay it all out and make it easy to read, but they did. They lay out each of the 5 methods. They defined each one, they gave its definition, they gave each one's merits, drawbacks, and then they explained why, for Putnam County's purposes, that particular model is inappropriate or might be appropriate or non-applicable. Okay? So the first staffing model in policing that they spoke of is called using crime trends. Essentially, crime goes up, the sheriff goes in front of the legislature asking for more deputies. Staffing is commensurate with rising crime rates. Now, this method is known to be ineffective for a couple of different reasons. First of all, you haven't established why you have rising crime. You may have rising crime because you're an incompetent police commander. And now, that segues into the second reason. You're now going to send your deputies or your cops into a failing system. You're going to cause what's called displacement. You're going to move the crime from one area to another, and then after you believe, wrongly, that crime has been crushed or been dissipated, you're going to reassign your resources, and that crime is going to come right back. And why? Because you didn't engage in problem-oriented policing. You did not address the conditions that caused that crime to exist in the first place. Now, I'm getting a little far afield, but I'm doing so because I want to explain what is behind Bonadeo's thinking. And I'll lay that out in a few minutes as to how I know what it is they're thinking. But for that reason, using crime trends is not recommended, for that very reason. And it's not recommended by the PhD professor and from my studies at school. The second method of police staffing is it's not really a staffing method, but a lot of departments use it in a colloquial sense. It's called minimum manning levels. Most departments, even precincts in the city, they have minimum manning. It's a predetermined level of manning. It's not recommended as a staffing level, and no departments really are guided by it, but it's considered a staffing method. The third staffing method, is called authorized budget levels. It's based upon what the municipality can afford rather than based upon rational assessment. Now, this one is not recommended for obvious reasons. You don't buy what you can afford, you buy what you need, or short of what you need if you can't afford it. But you don't buy everything you need just because you can, all right? Also, authorized budget level is very, very susceptible to political influence. The sheriff can very easily move resources around the county based upon the fact that his or her political allies are in one part of the county, and his political opposition or his political opposition voters are in another part of the county. So those sheriffs can move they can move the resources around in that way. So for that reason, authorized budget levels is not recommended. The fourth method I'm going to skim over quick. We're going to talk about it in a few minutes. It's called the workload-based model. Essentially, for the workload-based model, you follow the 911 calls for service. You don't follow other types of calls for service because there's a million of them. You're generally guided by your 911 system. The fifth and final staffing model is the per capita approach, and I really need you to pay attention because this was really at the heart of some of the complaints by the county's complaints that they made about the Bonadio report. All right, and I'll be getting into those complaints in a minute. But in the fifth and final staffing model, per capita approach, as I said, it's very important. It's an officer to population ratio. So generally, a healthy ratio would be 1.8 deputies to 2.6 deputies per 1,000 residents. All right. However, Bonadio did not use the per capita approach. They didn't use a per capita approach because in Putnam County, as we know, we have all these other police departments. You have the Carmel Police Department, Brewster, Kent, Cold Springs, State Police, MTA, etc., etc. We have all these other police departments. Those police departments do not fall under the operational control of the sheriff. In other words, the sheriff can't come in day to day and start assigning those other police departments. They don't fall under his control. So why would Bonadio even use the per capita approach and waste time coming up with a method when the local departments do not fall under the sheriff's control. All right, so Bonadio, to arrive at a number, would have to include all the personnel for all the local departments. Yet none of those resources fall under the sheriff's control. So for that reason, Bonadio did not use the per capita approach. All right, and if I was doing this analysis, I wouldn't have used it either, because at the end of the day, you're going to come up with a number, and that number essentially means nothing, because the sheriff can't use the per capita approach. It can't use the resources of those other departments. You understand? That's how it works. Again, if I was doing this analysis, that's exactly what I would have done. Okay. So Bonadio, as I said, they didn't use this approach, the per capita approach, and they said that 3 times. Very hard to miss. They said it 3 times that they didn't use the per capita approach, and they explained why they didn't use the per capita approach. If you go to page 11, quote, "The existence of local police departments within the county complicates this approach, as it creates inconsistencies of police per capita across the county, and the levels of policing provided by local departments is outside the county's control," close quote. Page 12, quote, "The existence of local police departments should be considered regarding the department's per capita strategy. However, this figure does not reflect the true law enforcement coverage across the county, as there are at least 4 local police departments and others who also service the population," close quote. On this basis, this is DeStefano now, on this basis, Bonadio states not once, not twice, but 3 times. Bonadio stated 3 times that the per capita approach is not appropriate for Putnam County and therefore was not, repeat, not used in this analysis. I hope I made that clear. All right. So now, this is a perfect time to segue into complaint number 1, but I do want to mention something pretty quickly, all right, just for a second. If it looks like I'm glancing down and looking up and glancing down and reading bullets and looking up, you know why? It's because I have 2 full legal pads. 2 full legal pads, almost 2 full legal pads of notes and analysis that took me almost 3 months to do. These are my notes. I did them. I even took this work on vacation with me twice. And I even jokingly, I put pictures of me doing this stuff by poolside. I really took this seriously. All right. So I would like some understanding about that. I took this very, very seriously. And I don't want to just wave it off, with the brush of a hand that he's wrong. Prove me wrong. All right. I have 2 full pages of notes here. So if it looks like I'm glancing down and I'm reading, it's because I can. They're my notes. As a converse, this is what I'm working off of. This is the report that I'm working off of. A newspaper article that I read the Sheriff's Department's complaints. A newspaper article. So again, this is a perfect time to segue into complaint number 1. As I said before, Sheriff's Department and the county came up with 6 reasons as to why they claim this report is defective. Complaint number 1. The Putnam County Sheriff's Office says the report is defective because it fails to, quote, accurately account for all law enforcement agencies that perform law enforcement functions in Putnam County, closed quote. Folks, what was I just talking about a minute ago? What did I just say? I'll say it again. Go to page 11. Quote, the existence of local police departments within the county complicates this approach as it creates inconsistencies of police per capita across the county, and the levels of this local policing is outside the county's control, close quote. So if Bonadio would have done what the Sheriff's Department is saying they didn't do, which caused this report to be defective, if Bonadio would have taken the head count, which is called the force figures, okay? So going forward, we'll call it the force figures. If Bonadio would have taken the force figures of Carmel and Kent and Cold Spring and State Police, etc., all right? it would have created inconsistencies in the police per capita across the county. Is that what the sheriff's department wants? Inconsistencies? That's exactly what it would have caused. And why? Because you're either going to come up with a number that doesn't include all those other police departments, or you're going to come up with a number that does include those police departments, but most resources not falling under the sheriff's department's control. So why come up with that number? It would be a waste of time. It would be an artificial number. That's the reason why Bonadio did not do the per capita approach. It's not because they were being lazy. It's because if they came up with the number, that number would have been inconsistent, because again, those resources would have fallen outside of the sheriff's control. So why come up with a number at all? And again, we continue. Page 12, Bonadio goes on to state, quote, "Figures do not reflect true law enforcement coverage across the county, as there are numerous local police departments that also service the population," close quote. On this basis, this is the Stefano, Bonadio states not once, not twice, but 3 times that this method is not appropriate for Putnam County and therefore was not, repeat, not used in the analysis. I hope I made that clear. So complaint number 1 itself is defective. Complaint number 2, Putnam County Sheriff's Office disagrees with Bonadio's conclusion that the Sheriff's Office allocates too many resources to towns with their own police department. Folks, Bonadio made no such statement. Bonadio drew no such conclusion. Bonadio drew no such conclusion. Regarding that issue, the issue is the Sheriff's Department says that Bonadio claims that the Sheriff's Department is allocating too many resources to towns with their own police department. All Bonadio said about that issue, they only spoke about Carmel, not any of the other towns. They only spoke about Carmel, and all they said about Carmel was that the Sheriff's Department would be wise from time to time to review their shared services agreement that they have with the town of Carmel, just to ensure that the county is getting its best bang for the buck. That's a bad idea? That makes the report defective? That is all Bonadio said. All Bonadio said was they talked about one town. They didn't talk about any of the other towns where they have other police departments, their own police departments, local police departments. They only spoke of Carmel. And again, all they said was that Carmel would be wise to, from time to time, the Sheriff's Department would be wise from time to time to take a look at the shared services agreement that they have with the town of Carmel, just to ensure that the county is getting its best bang for the buck. That is exactly what Bonadio said. That is all they said. And I read this report. I went over this thing 3 times. For 3 months. That's all they said. All right. Now, but what I find strange about that complaint, again, the issue is that the Sheriff's Department says that Bonadio claims that the Sheriff's Department allocates too many resources to towns with their own police department. To back themselves up, the Sheriff's Department claims they did an analysis. And their analysis is, quote, looking at the 3-year analysis this is the Sheriff's Department now, looking at our 3-year analysis for calls for service reveals that the most concentrated calls for service are in the towns of Phillipstown, Putnam Valley, Patterson, and Southeast. Go to page 29 of this report. Quote, we see that calls for service are most concentrated in the towns of Phillipstown, Putnam Valley, Patterson, and Southeast. That's Bonadio's quote. So the Sheriff's Department, to back up their own complaint that they are not allocating too many resources to towns with their own police department, they're giving a quote that Bonadio gave in their report. So if anything, they're reinforcing Bonadio's truth. So they just repeated what Bonadio said verbatim. So that complaint is invalid. Complaint number 3. The Sheriff's Office states that Bonadio takes into account calls for service received only by the county's 911 center, which is how you do it. And to that end says, quote, That is a large failure on the part of Bonadio to not look at other sources. Okay, close quote. Well, let's see. First of all, did the Sheriff's Department look at other sources in their critique of this report? Besides 911 calls for service, what other calls for service are there? I mean, like people walking into the sheriff's office to file a complaint? How many complainants walk into 3 County Center? I know it used to be kind of sizable. It's my understanding, no more. It's my understanding now they're all referred over to the 911 center. But how many complainants do you really think walk into 3 County Center to file a complaint? If the Sheriff's Department is going to say that only looking at the 911 center, at the county's 911, is only looking at calls for service 911 related, makes this report defective, then the Sheriff's Department has a burden. It's their burden, it's their complaint. They have to show what the other numbers are and then prove that the report is defective because there are significant other numbers. They never did that. All the Sheriff's Department said was Bonadio takes into account calls for service received only by the county's 911 center, and because of that, that's a large failure on the part of Bonadio to not look at other sources. Why is it a large failure? Because the Sheriff's Department says so? No, they have to come up with the other numbers. They have to show what the other numbers are. They never did that. But I can tell you for a fact anyway that looking at the 911 calls for service, that's how it's done. That's how it's done in policing. That's how I was taught. All right. However, we're gonna go over, because like I said, the Sheriff's Department, they had a burden. It was their burden to show what the other numbers are. If there's 911 calls for service, what are the other types of calls for service? And then show it. They never showed anything. All right. Now, going on this complaint, all right, saying that that Bonadio only relied on the 911 calls for service to configure staffing levels. This is what the PhD professor says about that. Quote, the calls for service rate through 911 is very strongly correlated with department staffing. He also says, quote, the 911 calls for service approach offers the most accurate and reliable predictor of police staffing methods. The most accurate and reliable predictor of police staffing methods. So they're saying maybe that's the reason why Bonadio did it, because it's the most accurate and reliable predictor. All right. So now, some of these complaints now, we're just going to segue one into another. Now, complaint number 4. This one comes from the Sheriff's Department. Now, when I say the Sheriff's Department, I don't know who did the actual critique, honestly. I know the sheriff presents it. He was asked who did this critique. He said, I have a command staff. That's my understanding in the minutes. So, because I tried to get as much information as I could. So, as far as I'm concerned, this came from a command staff because that's what the sheriff said. So, complaint number 4. This is a quote from the Sheriff's Department. Quote, Bonadio does not include crime rates, response time, service demands, and other things that need to be taken into consideration when configuring staffing levels. All right, there's a lot here. This is a very complex one. A lot of moving parts, so let me break it down. Let's go to the first one first. The Sheriff's Department is complaining that Bonadio report does not include crime rates. What's the first thing I said in this presentation? You do not use crime rates to configure staffing levels. Why? Because you haven't established why you have rising crime. You may have rising crime because you're an incompetent police commander. And to that end, you're going to go in front of the legislature, you're going to go in front of the town board, and you're going to ask for more deputies or more cops to put those deputies into a failing system, and then you're going to cause what's called displacement. You're going to move the crime from, all you're doing is going to move it from one area to another. It's called displacement, temporarily, until such time you believe it's gone away, and then you're going to pull those resources back, and then that crime is going to come right back. And why? because you did not address the conditions that caused those crimes to continue and to exist in the first place. That's problem-oriented policing. That's the way it's done today, all right? That's the reason why you do not include crime rates to configure staffing levels. And we already talked about that. They also said Bonadio didn't use response time to configure staffing levels. Now, folks, at this point, this is where I'm going to take off my my student hat for a minute, and I'm going to put on my police hat for a minute. I do know a little bit about policing. I rose to the rank of captain in the New York City Police Department, and I was a precinct captain. I was a precinct lieutenant. I was a precinct sergeant. I have a lot of experience on road patrol. And when I was there, every 24 hours, I had to sign off on a response time report. And that report had to be accurate. Every bit of it had to be accurate. We had somebody tracking it every single tour, every single call. And when the numbers were missing, when various numbers that we needed were missing, we went right after those sergeants and we made sure that they got on board to make sure that the response time in the future would be accurate. Response time is like a chain. And like any chain, there's a lot of links. And if you have one weak link, then the chain itself is weak. So what are some of the links in response time? Now, just to go back for a second, now I'm just thinking, you know, when the Sheriff's Department, the command staff, says that Bonadio report does not include crime rates, response time, service demands, they're talking about data. The rule of thumb in predicting crime is that you need 3 years of data to make 1 month of crime projections. Again, 3 years of data to come up with 1 month of crime projections. And I know that because I'm always stuck doing reports, you know, reports for school. In fact, I'm going to be starting one very, very soon on car break-ins, cars parked in your driveway in Putnam County. I'm going to be doing a semester-long analysis on that. Okay, but you need 3 years of data to provide 1 month of crime projections. Very tough. However, getting back to the one at hand, the response time. What is response time? What are some of the links in response time? The dispatcher puts the call out over the air. That's the first link, right? Then the deputy acknowledges the call. Then the deputy arrives on the scene. Deputy handles the call and gives back the disposition upon completion. All right. Only if you have good management and only if you have good street supervision can you reliably answer each of the questions accurately each tour that can you use response time to configure staffing levels. If you don't have this data, you're not configuring anything. So what data are you going to need? 1, how long did it take for the deputy to pick up the call after the dispatcher put it out over the air? 2, how long did it take for the deputy to arrive on the scene? 3, how long did it take for the deputy to spend at the call? Only if you know all of this data for each and every day, each and every call, each and every shift, each and every deputy, each and every 24-hour period, each and every week, can you configure staffing levels using response time? All right. Remember, crime data has to be accurate, consistent, and reliable. Accurate, consistent, reliable. That's what your data has to be, or else it's worthless. And data today in policing is the biggest thing, the most important thing. There's nothing more important than information, than data. Now this is going to segue right into complaint number 5. Some of them are kind of joined together. All right, the complaint was made, the claim was made that Bonadio didn't use Putnam County Sheriff's Office data, but instead used data from an average of 28 departments. I'm going to be addressing this now and in a few minutes, but this is outrageous. This allegation is outrageous. This is false. This allegation that they didn't use Putnam County Sheriff's Office data is false. You understand? False. Bonadio at all times in this report used data from Putnam County, New York, from the Putnam County Sheriff's Department. They did not use data from other police, from 28, an average of 28 other police departments or whatever they're claiming. They did not. What they did was only as it related to looking at response time and response time only. Now, what did I just say about response time? You're not going to configure staffing levels using response time anyway. So Bonadio had no obligation to go anywhere near this thing, but they did. They did, and they wanted to give a number just to show where Putnam County Sheriff's Office should be in terms of response time. Now, do you know why, when it came only to response time, did Bonadio use what's called, well, let me just go back. Do you know why they didn't use Putnam County data for their response time? You know why? Because it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. The Putnam County Sheriff's Department is not, repeat, not a data-driven agency. They are not a data-driven agency. Now, there's going to be talk. Yes, we are. Andy DiStefano doesn't know what he's talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. It's not a put-down. It's a fact. The Sheriff's Department is not a data-driven agency where they need to be. I know that for a fact, I'm telling you. So what Bonadio did was, instead of humiliating the Sheriff's Department and saying that the data I need doesn't exist, what Bonadio did was they went to what's called like a plan B. They used the ICMA method. They took an average of 28 similarly situated departments. They got an average, and they attributed, and those departments are similarly situated to Putnam County. They got an average, and they said generally this is where Putnam County would be in terms of response time. For everything else, for their overtime, for their staffing, for everything else, Bonadio used data from Putnam County. And what's outrageous about that is that that's in a letter from the county to the legislature. And I don't blame the legislature at all, and neither should you. Legislature's just taking what they see, and they have to run with it. But the legislature was now passed false information. The legislature now goes out and they pass that false information on to their constituents. They pass bad information on to their constituents. To members of the legislature and to elected officials, I know them. The credibility is everything to them. And now the county has them passing out wrong information. Bonadio did not use data from 28 other departments to configure the overtime and staffing. They're only talking about, again, response time. And again, they didn't even have to go anywhere near response time. But when they did, instead of humiliating the Sheriff's Department and telling them, hey, you guys aren't a data-driven agency, they just quietly used the ICMA method. Okay? They didn't take a shot at the Sheriff's Department and at the county the way these guys took a shot at Bonadio. That's outrageous, let me tell you. Complaint number 6. Sheriff's Office says, quote, within a 2-year period, we'll be able to have that causality for the overtime driver far more defined. Basically, it's going to take the Sheriff's Department command staff 2 years to figure out what's driving the overtime. 2 years. I don't understand why they made that statement, since Bonadio gave us everything we needed. They used the correlation coefficient. Now, what's a correlation? Correlation is an association between two variables, right? It's an association between two variables. Now, in this case, in this situation, what is always going to be one of the variables? Overtime, right? I mean, that's why we're here, overtime. So one of the variables is always going to be overtime. What is going to be the other variable? The other variable will be any factor that led to a deputy necessitating time off, and then if that time off led to any resultant overtime. Okay? Bonadio used correlation coefficient to measure the association between overtime and 10 different reasons for time off. They did a great job on this report. This is a thorough omnibus report. Now, what's a correlation coefficient? So I'll give you an example. Say you have a positive 1. Well, let's say that's how it is. You have positive 1, you have the 0, and you have negative 1. Positive 1 is a perfect positive. 0 is 0. -1 is a perfect negative. Now, let's say you have on this side, say Putnam County Sheriff's Office last month had 16 hours of military excusal time off. Now on this side, we have to figure out how much overtime was given out to cover that 16 hours of military excusal time. Now let's go further in the hypothetical. Let's just say, for instance, that the Sheriff's Office had to give out 16 hours of overtime to cover the 16 hours of military excusal time. That's 16 hours of overtime covering 16 hours of military time off. That's 16 to 16, that's 1-to-1. That's a perfect positive, that's a perfect 1. Now when I say perfect, that doesn't mean that's where you want to be or that it's good. That's in a mathematical sense. That means it's true. All right, that's what they're talking about. Now the other 10 things that the other 10 factors that led to this led to the time off. Bonadio went through it on page 37. If you can find page 37, we'll be talking about that in a minute. Okay, the 10 factors for overtime that Bonadio looked at, and if you can think of other reasons for time off, you let me know. COVID isolation time off, compensatory time off, military time off, vacation time off, personal time off, holiday time off, family sick time off, bereavement time off, workers' compensation time off. That's a thorough report. That is a very, very thorough report. Okay. Now, the Sheriff's Department again said they need 2 years to figure out the causality of the overtime drivers. When Bonadio just gave it to us, they just gave it to us. All right. The correlation coefficient. That's the causality. That's it. That's the causality now, and that's the causality in 2 years. In 2 years, you're still going to be using the correlation coefficient. This is PhD level statistics. It doesn't get any better than that. The strongest positive correlation to overtime hours in this report were compensatory time and vacation time. So the key overtime drivers were comp time and vacation time. Now, I understand it goes further than that, and if you look in the report, everything is there. Everything is there, and it makes sense. To perform this analysis, Bonadio converted the overtime and the time off data from absolute units, which is hours, right? The absolute units are the 16 and the 16 that I spoke of, from absolute units to percentage usage basis. And the answers to all of them are on page 37. That's how you get like the positive 0.21, positive 0.14, negative 0.13. It's all a percentage usage basis, but that's correlation coefficient. Okay. Now, to go over all this here, what was Bonadio's final conclusion about the Sheriff's Department under the previous sheriff that they were analyzing? Go to page 38 if you can find it. Quote, data indicates the department is being proactive in scheduling around vacation to limit resulting overtime, close quote. Page 40, quote, current level of overtime is within an expected and acceptable range, close quote. Whoever hired Bonadio, whoever came up with this idea to hire Bonadio on the previous sheriff, do you really think that they believed that Bonadio was going to come up with that conclusion? I don't know. You know, listen, it's like I said when I first started. I don't know. You're going to have to decide. I don't tell people what to think. I just do the analysis. That's my job. That's the job of a crime analyst. That's what I'm studying. Okay? Now, I have several personal observations, and the conclusions are my own and no one else's. Number one, as I said before, I have almost 2 full legal pads of notes and calculations. Okay? Almost 2 full legal pads. However, the county and the Sheriff's Office failed to issue a written report, and when they appeared before the legislature, they weren't asked for one. At least not that I know of. All right? And at least not publicly. Again, this is what I'm working off of. This is what I'm working off of. A newspaper article. $45,000 of our money, and I'm working off of a newspaper article. Now, the county, there's a letter from the former county executive which lays out a couple of complaints against Bonadio, which is part of this analysis. The complaints themselves are unfounded, and I'll be getting to one of them in a minute. But, I mean, there's nothing, there's no written report that I see. And when they testified, or when they gave a statement to the legislature never asked for one, at least that I know of, all right? Number two, the timing of this report is propitious. We were several months into a pandemic shutdown. We all remember the shutdown. I'm not talking about just COVID, I'm talking about the shutdown. We were months and months and months into the COVID pandemic shutdown. And you would expect that the numbers, the overtime numbers at the Putnam County Sheriff's Department, you would expect those numbers to be skewed, to be high, maybe to be missing a little bit, maybe some of the categories to be very low or very high, or to be off the charts or non-existent. You would expect inconsistent data. We're in a shutdown here, okay? And unlike all the other departments, not all, that's a mistake. I know there was other departments working. You know, I know even volunteers, fire departments and stuff. But the Sheriff's Department is not one of those agencies that can phone it in. They're not one of those agencies that can work by Zoom. They have to keep coming to work. They had to keep with the grind. So they through True or whatever, they had to keep going. They had to keep going forward and put people on the street and answer the calls like they always do, day and night, protecting this county, and they had to do it through a COVID pandemic, all right? That was part of the timing. Why would they authorize this thing months after a COVID pandemic shutdown? Why? That doesn't seem fair at all. You know what that looks like to me? Just as a crime analyst, you know what it looks like? That looks like, again, I'm not saying this what it is, I'm saying it's what it looks like. It looks like somebody was trying to catch Sheriff Langley with his pants down. That's exactly what it looks like. Tell me it doesn't look like that, that's fine. To me, that's what it looks like. It looks like somebody was trying to hit a man when he was down. And they failed. They failed, all right? And this was also several months prior to the election for Putnam County Sheriff. Common sense dictates that a negative report on the sheriff at that time, on Sheriff Langley, would no doubt be used to the advantage by any challenger candidate for sheriff. Anyone running against Langley, anybody. This report would be used to that person's advantage. That is unequivocally true. Unequivocally true. What should have happened was, you should have waited. You want $45,000 for this report. There's an election coming up in a number of months. People should have waited. You should have said, you know what? There's an election in a number of months. If Langley wins and he stays in office, then all right, maybe we can revisit this. But if he loses, he's out anyway. And the new guy is gonna come in with a new sheriff, new ideas, and a new team. So he's out anyway. So, you know, they should have waited. They should have waited. As far as authorizing this thing months into a pandemic shutdown, that doesn't sound fair. That doesn't sound fair at all. And I'm just, again, this is not Republican or Democrat. I'm being honest here. I'm being very honest here. All right, and that's what law enforcement calls for. That's what being a crime analyst calls for. Just calling it as you see it. I mean, I don't think anybody can disagree with that. Number three, instead of utilizing this report to make it a resource and a learning tool, I'm told, there were 3 requests for revisions were made, which resulted in the Bonadio report being released after Election Day. Okay? What could be the reason for 3 forced delays? It gives the appearance, again, I'm not saying it is, it gives the appearance that they were temporizing, that they were taking action in order to gain time. They were putting this off in order to gain time. All right? Where are these 3 requests? I don't know. I have a FOIL in to the county. We'll see where that goes. I don't see why it should be denied. this is my $45,000. This is your $45,000. Unless somebody steps up and personally pays for this, this is public tax money. This is, that's not confidential. So we'll see if those 3 requests for revisions are approved. But anyway, in the report, there's no indication. There is no indication anywhere in this report that there was a pivot, that there was a movement, that there was a change in direction. If there was a revision request, I believe, and I've helped my professors write these things, I believe that Bonadio would have noted that at least in the report. Say, look, this is what we looked at. However, the county wanted us to look at something else. That's what I believe. All right. There's no indication anywhere that this report has any revisions in it, and 55 pages, 20,000 words, numbers, etc. Do you know what word doesn't appear in here? Revision. Now, what makes me say that? What makes me say it sounds like they were trying to catch, Sheriff Langley with his pants down, and then when they couldn't, this report was held on to after Election Day. I'm just going to go to the quote. This appears to indicate the Sheriff's Department is being proactive in scheduling around overtime to limit the amount of resulting overtime, closed quote. This report acknowledges that the Sheriff's Office under Sheriff Langley had an efficient overtime program in place. That's me paraphrasing. Okay. Then, page 40, quote, overtime is within an expected and acceptable range, close quote. I'll say this once again. Do you really think that whoever came up with this idea, do you really think they thought that Bonadio was going to come up with that conclusion? And whoever reanalyzed this or analyzed it over Bonadio and claimed that Bonadio did a terrible job, why didn't they just have them do the report then and save us $45,000? I don't know. You'll have to decide. Okay, number 5. And this one, let me tell you something. This one is very serious. This one is very serious. I'm going to tell you for a fact what they do with these reports. And I know this because I have many professors in advanced crime analysis, and my professors, they work on these things. And I've helped them work on a couple of them. Not this one and not for Bonadio. But to help get work in postgraduate classes and stuff like that and get your hours in, I have helped professors write some of these reports. I know how it goes. All right. My professors all over the place, they get hired to do these things. Yeah, someone else signs off on it, but college professors with PhDs get paid to come in and oversee them. Multiple professors come in and get to oversee them. All right. They even bring in another professor who's probably like a professor in like English or literature to make sure everything is spelled correctly, to make sure it makes sense, and to make sure there's no plagiarism. So there's a number of PhDs that work on that. On top of that, okay, so now you got a couple of PhDs working on this report. Correct? I think we've established that. Then you have another PhD who's coming in and looking at the grammar, the spelling, checking for plagiarism, etc. Then the whole thing is being put together as one cohesive unit by a certified fraud examiner. Correct? That's who signed off on it, a certified fraud examiner. That certified fraud examiner then sends it to a printer, right? They got to get it printed up and everything else. So it goes through that entire process and all those people. Then the Sheriff's Department, right? The sheriff said that his command staff looked at this thing, right? The county, in this page-and-a-half letter or whatever it is, they claim they looked at it. It doesn't say who looked at it, but the county says they looked at it too, right? As a matter of fact, this is the county's letter, and it's to the legislature, and it's signed off by the county executive. It doesn't say who did their analysis, but one of the complaints that they have like 5. It says that Bonadio also did not utilize call data specific to our own Sheriff's Department. I already told you that allegation is false. That allegation is false. They were only pertaining to response time and nothing else. When it came to overtime and staffing, they were and the correlation coefficient, they were looking at Putnam County data, Putnam County, New York State. However, I'm just reading the complaint. All right, Bonadio did not utilize call data specific to our own sheriff's department. Please see page 14. Okay, let's go to page 14. Let's go to page 14. Where's page 14? Where's page 15? Where's page 51? This thing has no page numbers. This work has no page numbers on it. It has no page numbers. So how is it that the county is saying turn to page 14 when there's no page numbers on it? How? How did PhD professors on, so there's two sides. You got the Bonadio side and you got the Putnam County side of the fence. How did PhD professors forget to put page numbers on this? How did a certified fraud examiner forget to put page numbers on this? How did a printer not realize that there's no page numbers on it? And then when it came over to the Putnam County side, how did the command staff at the sheriff's department realize there's no page numbers on it? Obviously, in going over this, the sheriff's department and the county were hell-bent on making sure that this report looked defective. They were hell-bent on saying this report is defective, period, end of sentence, end of discussion, we don't want to talk about it. That was the attitude last year. Okay, if you want to be honest. That was the attitude. We know better, you don't. Well, show me what page 14 is. So now you have the command staff at the sheriff's department, you have them looking at this report, according to the sheriff, and you have the county looking at this report. And they're telling you, refer to page 14. There's no page numbers on this report. How is there no page numbers? And it's not like they weren't used. What's the first page? What's the first page? Table of contents. Okay? If you want to know about road patrol, go to page 12. If you want to know about geographic patrol zone data, go to page 25. Where? No page numbers. And if you want to do an analysis, you have to have page numbers on there because you're constantly referring, front and back, front and back, front and back. I mean, look what I had to do. And this isn't for show. I had to do it. I had to write in my own page numbers. I had to write them in. You can't do an analysis if you have no page numbers. So how is it that document has no page numbers and nobody in the command staff at the sheriff's department and nobody at the county picked up on it? Can anybody explain that? I have to tell you, I can't get past that fact. I can't get past that fact because there's no excuse for it. There's no excuse for it. And last year we were told we're not going to talk about it. Not going to talk about it. It's not open for discussion. Well, you know who's the only one who can tell us why there's no page numbers on this? Bonadio. They're the only ones who can tell us. So, I don't know. $45,000, what tax money went into this? All right? Do you know what it looks like? Do you know what it looks like to me? It looks like, and to others who I have confided in, all cops, by the way, and one lawyer. It looks like somebody on this side of the fence, on the Putnam side of the fence, manipulated that report. Again, I'm not saying that's what it is. I'm saying that's exactly what it looks like. Because Bonadio did not forget to put page numbers on a report. On that thing. They did not forget to put page numbers. There's a reason why Bonadio can charge $45,000 for a simple report that I could have done for nothing. There's a reason for that. And had I been asked, I would have done this report for nothing, for free. But there's a reason why Bonadio can charge $45,000. Because they can bring in some heavy firepower. They can bring in some big college professors. They have some big people standing behind them. They did not forget to put page numbers on this. But again, the only one who can tell us definitively is Bonadio. I'll leave it at that. I'll let the legislature think about that one. So while the county tried to convince us, this is number 6 now, while the county tried to convince us that this wasn't about Sheriff Langley. This was about the department itself. And this goes back. This goes back to Smith, and it goes back to Thoberon, and it goes back to Weisnecker, and it goes back to the guy who was before Weisnecker, and the guy before him, and the guy before him, and the guy before him. I mean, this goes back because we have been dealing with overtime issues in the sheriff's department for decades, right? That was the feeling that was put out, right? This wasn't an attack on Langley, right? Folks, let me explain something. This here, the Bonadio report, this was not a legacy report. Do you know what this was? This was a Langley report. I'll say it again. This was not a legacy report. This was a Langley report. And you know how I know that? Because Bonadio admitted it several times. They said it several times. Maybe that's why Bonadio wasn't, maybe that's why nobody wants to talk to them. They admitted in the report. They said several times that they were asked to look at the data starting on January 1st, 2018. What's the magic to January 1st, 2018? That was Bob Langley's first day at work. So if that report is not about Sheriff Langley, then why were they only looking at Sheriff Langley's data? They didn't have data before January 1st, 2018? They don't have any of that stuff going back 10, 12, 20 years? They don't have that? I would think they would. Okay? So, do you know what I think happened? This is what I believe happened. And again, the conclusion is my own. No one else's. I believe that the plan was hatched by a small group of people to hire the Bonadio group, or to hire anybody, right? Pay them a lot of money to come up with a report that is going to bury Bob Langley in the upcoming sheriff race. I think that's exactly what this is about. And when it didn't do that, and they saw that Bonadio is concluding that Langley's overtime is within expected and acceptable limits, quote unquote, then the report was held until after Election Day. And then when people demanded to see it, I mean, they just ripped this thing apart. They just ripped this report apart. Our elected officials are expected to be parsimonious. They are expected to be parsimonious, and we vote them in to be parsimonious. In other words, to be incredibly stingy and cheap with our money. That's what we expect. We don't expect $45,000 to be spent on things like this. Look, so where are we now? We're at the end, right? If we're going to force ourselves to not learn from this report, and we were told by the county last year, don't look at this report. Don't look at it. You had the sheriff's department and you had the county totally vitiating this report. I mean, it was they were hell bent on vitiating this report. We're told don't look at this report. Don't go by its findings. It's a terrible report. It's defective. The complaints against the report were defective, by the way, as you saw. But we were told no. This report is defective. It's no good. Don't look at it. Okay, so we spend $45,000 on something that we're not going to use anymore, and we don't want to learn from it. Maybe we can learn this. Maybe we can learn this. How about this? Going forward, maybe we can agree that we should not be spending taxpayer money on things that are clearly political opposition research. Want me to say that again? I'll say it again. It is inappropriate to be spending our tax money on political opposition research. If we can take that, if our elected officials can take that as a foundation, and take that every time they are requested for money, and just keep that in the back of their head, what is the purpose of this thing? Then, you know what? Then maybe there is hope for the county. I don't know. I don't even know what to say. I do know that there's a lot of questions here, and some of them can only be answered by Bonadio, because you have a certified fraud examiner now, which is kind of like a CPA, signing off on this thing and then sending it to the county executive, who then presents it to the legislature as a public document. And this thing appears to be manipulated. Again, I am not saying it is. I'm saying it appears to be. Because you'd have to say that a company that gets $45,000 for a report that I could have done for free, they forgot to put page numbers? I don't know. I don't think so. So in any event, we're at the end. Thank you so much for hanging in. We're probably at the 45-minute mark, which is about 10 minutes more than I wanted. Thank you for hanging in. This has been Putnam County Crime Analysis, and I am Andrew DiStefano. Hasta la próxima.